Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, January 25th, 2024. Tonight's format is one that we open up either every other webinar, every other broadcast, every other podcast that we produce. We like to have a live Q&A for our current and alumni clients. So, and it's also for extended family and friends and siblings of clients that have come to us. So if you want to share this with people on the front end, if you want to invite them to come to the Q&A, like I said, it's for anybody associated with the Evoke Therapy family. We're happy to send these. We're happy for you to send these to them so that they can attend and ask their questions. If you want to ask questions that you're getting asked, you can ask those. And if you're asking for it on behalf of somebody and they're under the age of 18 or they're not an adult, feel free to give me their age so that I'm answering in a way that matches their development, that matches where they're at. So that's what this is tonight, an open forum for our live audience. And so I have a couple of pre-submitted questions. If you're a live attendee right now, you can submit questions at any time. Livy, who is moderating for me this evening, will then pass them on to me when there's space in the broadcast for me to speak to them. So let's get right to the pre-submitted questions. These questions were sent in using the address webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can always use that address to send in questions, suggestions. If you have things that you want to prompt me to speak on topics, you're welcome to do any of that via that email address. So let's get to question number one, pre-submitted question number one. Here's how it reads. It says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on brothers, preteen, early teen fighting. When I try to talk about it, people just say boys will be boys, they'll fight. I'm finding it extremely difficult to manage and deal with. It's awful seeing and hearing your own babies hurting each other on purpose. For context, I am separated from their other parent, but our relationship did not involve violence. I saw this question come in a few days ago and I've thought about it several times. I'll start off by saying that was true of me and my brothers. And I remember at times we had babysitters that would come into the family and say, look, children don't treat each other like this. And of course, she was wrong. We did treat each other like that. So there can be a boys will be boys energy to it for sure. But aside from that, or underneath all of that, it's not necessarily just about the fact that they're fighting with each other. It's what it represents. Understanding where the anger is, understanding where maybe the the sibling becomes a target for the unexpressed anger that the child might need to express towards parents or to their situation. Maybe even the separation or divorce is creating a sense of powerlessness for them, and since attacking or becoming aggressive or violent towards parents is an unthinkable solution for small children especially, maybe the sibling is somebody that they can take their aggression out on. So more than anything, always when I think about a behavior, and I'm not suggesting this is a boys will be boys situation, but whenever you see behavior in your child that's concerning to you, the first suggestion that I always have is get curious about what it could mean before trying to eradicate the behavior. See if you can understand what's happening there. And you're going to have to experiment. You're going to have to try out hypotheses, right? Try out the hypotheses that I've offered for you this evening and say, I wonder if there's anger. How do we express anger in our family? Is anger okay to express in our family if it's expressed appropriately and assertively and non-aggressively or non-violently? Can I welcome anger in this process? Do my children feel powerless? Is this an expression of my children's angst over the separation and divorce that we might be experiencing? And even if you weren't separated, is it an expression of some dynamic in the family? I thought about this a lot lately. In fact, I think that this is probably one of my biggest messages as of late to our staff here at Evoke is that when I graduated from graduate school and started working in wilderness therapy 28 years ago, I remember that my professors announced in the course of my studies that the time of treating the identified patient was gone. It had died. And of course, when I went into the workforce, I was surprised to find that the identified patient model was alive and well. And nearly 30 years later, it still is alive and well. The reason I'm bringing up that story in response to your question is because the child or children in this case are symptom bearers. They are lightning rods, if you will. They are the ones that are displaying symptoms that are evidence of the organism of the family's difficulty, pathology, struggle, developmental challenges, whatever's going on with the family. So again, this idea that the child bears the symptom, it's really important that we see past and through the symptom, and we start to ask ourselves bigger questions. My other thoughts are, could play therapy be effective for the younger ones? Play therapy is an excellent, the preferred modality for children, even for teens in many cases. And that's why our wilderness program can be so effective for treating teens, is because it's experiential, right? It involves camping and living in a nomadic model in the wilderness, right? Small groups camping. There's games also that are played, but it's it's giving them access to the language that is the language of children, which is play, which is using their body. Children don't have the same kind of verbal capacities that adults have. They don't have the same kind of reasoning and access to logic and forethought that later adults do because of brain development. So play is the language of children, and so play therapy could be very effective. A good play therapist will bring the parent in to watch or to play with them. Then they will feed back to the parent their observations and what they're seeing. It's difficult. I had my two younger children in play therapy during our separation in 2010, 11, and 12. And some of the feedback that I got, was clearly accurate and true, and some of it wasn't. Some of it I had to try on for size and see if it fit. So, like I said in the beginning, try out some hypotheses and then watch and see if they're true. My clearest thought on this matter is that their violence and aggression toward each other is, again, not just a symptom of something that's happened in the family. This is really important, but how the family operates, the soup that the family cooks the children in, if you will. I'm talking about this more and more these days, but when we talk about trauma, which is the new buzzword, right? The new trend in psychotherapy, going back to the beginning of psychotherapy, the invention where they knew in the beginning that it was all trauma, but now it's being talked about in a much more public and prolific way than it has been for the past 20 or 30 years, especially in the United States. But we're not usually talking about big T trauma. Some of you might have heard me share that my dissertation was a study of seeing if trauma could be mitigated by any other kind of family process. Was there anything that families were doing that would minimize the effects of these overt traumas that we were studying? We were specifically studying having a parent who's identified as an alcoholic and divorce as a trauma, very common traumas. And what we found was that a group of questions out of the hundreds of questions that we asked young adult participants, a group of questions that surrounded the idea of, was my parent, did I have somebody in my life that was consistently there, who saw me, who understood me? In other words, long before I even thought about attachment as much, or in the ways that I think about it now as the kind of the core idea in child development, long before all of that, we came to the conclusion, because of the data showed us this, that the folks that answered positively on the questions around, did I have somebody consistent in my life who saw me and understood me, they didn't have negative effects from the outcome. Whether their parents were divorced or not, we couldn't tell the difference. They didn't have the same kind of symptomology. We specifically measured satisfaction in intimate young adult relationships. So if you were divorced, if you had parents that were divorced, which seems like, if anything, that can contribute to a child's development in the way that they look at relationships. But if you were divorced or not, it didn't matter if you answered the question that I had somebody in my life consistent that saw me, which is a very simplistic and fundamental definition of a secure attachment. And there were a few questions like that showed the same kind of data, the same kind of outcomes. So back to your question. Be curious. Is this an invitation for you and your co-parent to unlearn some of the things that you learned about parenting and about feelings and about communication and about relationships, about psychology? Have you accepted some of the wrong questions for life's most important questions? I love this next quote that I'm going to share with you from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, excuse me, he says, we must love in such a way that the other one feels free. I love that idea. And he goes on to say, to love without knowing how to love, to love without knowing how to love wounds the person we love. Parents, including us, unfortunately, we do a lot of things to our children and we justify it. We label it as an act of love. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's control, sometimes it's based on our insecurities, our undone work. Sometimes we're asking the child to get rid of parts of themselves that we weren't allowed to show in our childhood. I find that cycle breakers and so many of the people that listen to these podcasts and read my book and follow my work are cycle breakers. They are the first one in a family lineage who decide to break the patterns of intergenerational trauma, right, as best they can, to do as much work in that area. Cycle breakers are pinched in the middle. And what I mean by that is they've come to terms with the fact that they were dented as children, that they have trauma from principally their parents and their family of origin. And they're going to work on that. They're going to take responsibility for those dents and those bruises, and they're going to heal them so as to prevent the transmission to the younger generation. At the same time that they're doing this work, they also realize that they can't talk to their parents about it, or it's limited. They have limited ability to talk to their parents about it because their parents are still wounded. Their parents aren't the cycle breakers. The parents weren't the ones to stop this transmission. The parents passed on ideas about love and relationships in life that just weren't accurate, that just weren't right. So they can't go to their parents. They can't go backwards to get support. And at the same time, they've also come to the realization that the fundamental responsibility of the parent is to hold space for the child, to not ask the child to take care of you, to take responsibility for your own serenity, your own happiness, your own reactions, your own trauma and its trauma responses. So that's why I like to think of it compassionately as cycle breakers get pinched. In essence, they have very little support from the previous generation because that generation didn't start to change the cycles and is still in the old way, the old life. And the child isn't responsible for helping the parent out on this project. So the parent is left with the responsibility, the burden for their own individuation, their own differentiation, their own growth, their own life. And that is why, folks, that is why it is absolutely critical that you find mentors, you find mature and wise friends to talk to. You develop a relationship with a co-parent if you're able to, that is supportive. You find a therapist if you can. You find groups, free groups if therapy and its costs are prohibitive. You find free groups like Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous to surround yourself with people that are thinking in these new ways, these healing and recovery ways. So that's a lot to talk about, to say, that's my thought about children fighting with each other, using violence with each other. It's a symptom. And it's trying to tell us something is not working for the child. There's some untold story that violence towards each other represents and communicates. And it's our job to develop the ears to listen to it. And getting help with a child therapist, a play therapist, for example, is a wonderful way to develop that sense of hearing, those ears that I talk about. To listen to the interpretation, and lastly, to try on the hypotheses, to take your best guesses, to look at the usual suspects, if you will, and grab a hold of an idea and then see if it plays itself out. And that curiosity, even that shift of trying to figure out what's going on instead of thinking of the behavior as the problem, that shift is almost enough. I have a lot of parents that I've worked with, and when they start to make the shift, they're eager for it all to get better real quick, right? We all want to get, once we realize and wake up to the fact that we are human beings, fallible, and that fallibility has hurt the children that we love, maybe the people that we love most on this planet. When that awakening happens, people want to get better quick. But just like going to the gym, right? I started going to the gym a couple of years ago, and again back, and and many of you can relate to this experience after taking a long time off during the pandemic, going back to the gym. After just one or two or three workouts, my body did not change at all, but I liked my body better almost immediately. It wasn't about arriving at some certain level of fitness or body fat composition or muscle mass or anything like that. I don't even look at the scale anymore. But it was being on the journey that made all the difference in the world. So that's the journey to be on. That's the heroic question. I was going to share this at some point, but I think this is a really great moment to share this. This quote by Carl Jung that I may have shared the other night, but I was going to share it as a post, as a slide this evening and read it. Here's what it reads. It says, parents should always be conscious of the fact that they themselves are the principal cause of neuroses in their children. And I went on to explain, it's not that you're the only cause, right? Peers, culture, teachers, the school system, all of those characters have their part in this play and this drama. But when a parent takes on this idea, when a parent comes to consciousness and realizes that they are the principal cause of neuroses in their children, there's a depression, a guilt, and a shame that can be a part of that charge and that awakening. But if you come to that awareness, you've gotten past those sentinels. You've gotten past the guards of the gate, at the gate, so to speak, and you've accepted this idea, this answer. And the shame and the guilt starts to melt away. And you realize that this is good news. Because if I'm the principal cause, I can be most impactful on contributing to my child's healing going forward. But remember, it's not about fixing the child, it's about fixing you. I was reading James Hollis today. I love this quote. He said, all the prophets are clear on one thing. If you want to see into the future and into the past, if you want to see and get a glimpse into the mystery, get a mirror. And don't worry about arriving. Don't worry about having it all figured out. Enlightenment isn't that. People that are enlightened don't ever think that they've arrived, because that's nonsense. People that are enlightened are more and more aware of their fallibilities, their imperfections, their humanness, the reality of who they are and what that does to the people around them. And you'll recognize that when you listen to enlightened people. They talk about their idiocy all the time with humor and not taking themselves too seriously. So those are my thoughts about that. All right, I have a 5-parter that just came in. So let me get to that. 5-part question. So sit back and relax and let me read it to you. Somebody writes, thank you for the recent show on repairing relationships with our children. As I was listening, I realized that I'm getting much better with listening and containing what my 19-year-old son shares with me. I think him being an adult makes it much easier to not lecture him and accept him for who he is. Interestingly, this episode made me think of my mother and our relationship. I visit her once a week and she is 87. On one visit, her conversation was so triggering to me. As background, I believe she grew up during World War II and heard of deaths, and she also talks about death and consequences. She raised her 5 children with a lot of anxiety and fear. That makes sense. It's a very common profile for that generation. She feels very strongly about doing things right and is very tied up in how she looks. When she talks about other people, they are wonderful if they make a lot of money, have good skin, and are beautiful, and if they do things in a perfect way. I guess she was cooked in this soup, as you say, but I always was alert to it and was something I actively rejected. Fast forward, and I am listening to these stories of the past, and they are riddled with how her mother and father were perfect. I know they weren't, because no one is, but they clearly did not see the anxiety she had as a child and it sounds like she got what she wanted by crying. I attempted to tell her how it affected us. I don't know if she even heard me. She now thinks her sister, 2 years younger, wasn't affected at all by the war and somehow thinks she is a better person for having this reaction. Again, she doesn't see that people can be affected differently. She thinks her sister has a deficit because it didn't affect her in the same way. I recall in your last show you said that your needs need to be met or you will have bubbling over and you won't be able to listen and contain what others are saying to you, and that if your needs are met, you can listen and say that you are okay. I've been working on myself and I'm able to listen to my son's ideas that don't upset me like they did before, and I can hear him without giving advice. When I listen to my mother, even when I know she grew up in a certain way and won't change, it can still be annoying to hear. I think of how she holds on to how she is perfect and how this has affected my younger sisters. They are people pleasers who today seem fearful of being themselves and possibly losing a relationship. They are very kind people, but they have learned this anxiety and belief of a need to please people. I've been talking with one sister about what I have been learning, and I think our mother was wounded much more than me. I guess I'm curious if I am wounded in another way, that I did not let this people pleasing affect me, so I have strength that might also be a weakness. Our relationship for a long time has been me being the person she calls when she wants or needs anything, not the other way around. She has told me you were different. You acted like I was a rebel, but I didn't. But I never did anything in a rebellious way as a child, other than being impatient and moving forward when I couldn't wait any longer. I am also wondering if, since my mother will never say she is sorry for anything, that healing a relationship with a parent is not completely possible. I find that I tend to just see her once a week and not even talk on the phone. In the past, when I had children, I would talk to her every day. But once I had a child with oppositional behavior, it was painful. She would tell me things like, I wouldn't be able to do what you're doing. Maybe you should just let him do what he wants to do. You should do this, etc. Early on, spanking was the answer. I rationalized that she was just trying to help, but all she did and said was tainted with how, if you did things her way, you would have perfect children. She doesn't know that we don't think that she is a perfect mother. When I hear her talking, it's sometimes like listening to a chalkboard screeching. Yet I say to myself, she doesn't know differently, and she gets very upset when challenged. I still feel like I need a drink when I get home, but I talk it out or do something healthier and get past it. Is there any way to talk to someone who I think has narcissistic qualities so they won't change and who will likely just have a stroke if challenged? It's like I'm pretending when I hear her or am in an out of body experience. I think this is where my Christian background kicks in and I do what is right. But I have boundaries on when to say my goodbyes. It is not always like that, but lately, because I think she knows she won't be around forever, she is reliving her past and telling me untrue stories, and I think painting everything in a perfect way, and it is hard to listen to. I think I'm very matter of fact and truthful, probably in a direct opposition to what I see in my mother. So I think her hyperbole is particularly annoying. Any advice that would change anything? I know I need to work on myself so it bothers me less, and I am, but is there anything else? Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's nice to have a long question with a lot of background that gives me really great context. I have a few thoughts about it, of course. The first thing I want to explain to all of you is this: people that are more enlightened, it's not, this is important, it's not that they can tolerate anything. It's not that they have the capacity to struggle through everything that is presented to them. That's not that their trick. That's not what they've accomplished in this enlightenment, this growth and healing. What they know and do better than us, than the rest of us, is they don't put themselves in situations that would be triggering. And their ability to do that is because enlightenment requires the ultimate, getting rid of shame and guilt, not having those be your moral North Stars. And so they can set boundaries. They can, for example, I've shared this many times, show up late. I had a Buddhist monk that was co-presenting with me one time who showed up 25 minutes late to his portion of the co-led presentation. And we waited, me and all the parents and staff waited for 25 minutes while he fixed his meditation. I could see him in a back office meditating. He knew the time. I had that confirmed. So as I sat there frustrated that he wasn't doing what I would do, what my mom taught me about punctuality, and I have a neurotic relationship with time and punctuality that I like. All right, it's one of those neuroses that I like being early. I like being on time. It helps me it relieves me of stress, gives me some pseudo sense of control. I got a whole story around that. But anyway, I'm watching him meditate. And I'm thinking, I think I get it. He's not going to show up. It doesn't matter how frustrated we get, how upset the rest of we are that he's late. He's not going to show up until he's ready. So I don't have any advice, of course, about what to do with your mother, but it's okay for you to take care of yourself. It is okay to take care of yourself. And I'm speaking to you, mom and dad, all of you. You don't owe anybody an explanation for the way that you're living your life. Not me or anybody else. You don't have to justify your life. I'm speaking specifically that if you decide to set more boundaries with your mother, if the trigger gets to be too much for you and you step away and you visit her less, set some kind of stronger, clearer boundary with her, you don't owe me or any therapist or any person or your mother or anybody explanation for your life. That's what it means to take on the responsibility for your own differentiation, for your own individuation. And I'm not talking about this hyper self focus. Individuation is not that. Individuation is also the precursor for the capacity for intimacy in relationships, for healthy relationships. It's necessary. The health of any relationship, your most intimate relationships, is based on the quality and the amount that you've done on your work with individuation. It's like what my daughter I shared with you guys a couple of weeks ago. When my daughter asked she loves to ask lots of hypothetical questions, and she said, if you could have the magic power to read people's mind, to know what they were thinking about you, you couldn't turn it off though. If you accepted the gift, the superpower, you couldn't turn it off. And I thought for a moment, no, I don't want that. And she said to me, why not? And I said, because I'm not mature enough. I already feel the vibrations, read people's faces. I'm already hyper vigilant and capable of reading what people are thinking and feeling a lot of the time. That's my training also. That's my profession. And it's already an overwhelming feeling so much of the time in my personal life. I don't want more of that. And after I answered the question, it was a little bit shorter than that. My daughter said, me either. I wouldn't want it either. She said, I think then you would have to be at the point in your life where you don't really care. It doesn't affect you. The things that people think about you. So the reason I tell that story again is because you see, the wisdom there is not in hoping that I can be mature enough, convincing myself that I'm mature enough that I could do that. It's realizing that I'm not. Right? That's the wisdom. That's the path toward becoming to healing. So I think you're already a good way there with the way that you're describing the boundaries have come, and you get to decide what is too much. You get to decide. Only you get to decide. It reminds me of if you haven't seen it, there's a series that Ricky Gervais did called Afterlife. It's a sweet series about grief and loss. He's the character, he's the main character, and he lost the love of his life, his soulmate. And it's about him going on with life and figuring out if he wanted to or not and what it was going to look like. But there's this one scene, he works in a small newspaper, and one of his coworkers says to him, she says, so am I right? She says to Gervais's character, she said, am I right that you don't believe in God? And he said, no, I don't. And she said, well, why don't you go around raping, and what's stopping you from going around and raping and murdering as much as you want to? And Gervais says, I already do that. I already do rape and murder as much as I want to. It's like that guru I shared with you guys a long time ago who said, do what's easiest to you. That's my advice. Do what's easiest to you. If you haven't seen the movie Poor Things, and I will give one qualifier, it has a lot of graphic sex in it. Absolutely. And if that is triggering for you, I do not recommend it. It was tough to watch for me at times. But the message is profound. The message of we get to figure this life out. And if we were given carte blanche freedom, at least as this movie shows it, we would come to ourselves. Just like Ricky Gervais's character says in the movie, I rape and plunder as much as I want to every day, which is, of course, 0. I don't not do it because I shouldn't. I don't do it because I don't want to. So as crazy as this sounds, you get to do what you want to. You're going to anyway. You're always doing that anyway. Do what's easiest. Do what makes you happy. And if you err one way, it's okay for you to shift back. If you set a boundary and that doesn't feel good to you, you can shift back to seeing her more. And if you see her more and that doesn't feel good, you can shift anytime you want to. But the weird, paradoxical thing about all of this is that the highest morality that exists isn't based on these cultural ideas of right and wrong. It's based on the capacity to love that comes to us when we have done our healing and our work. When we have made it past the guards at the gate, the guards are named guilt and shame. When we make it past those guards, we get into the kingdom. All that's left is love, right? Because you're freed of the burden of judgment too. And so all you want to do when you experience that kind of grace is you want to give it away to other people. And since there's no right or wrong, you're not unworthy of love anymore, that's not on the table anymore, you don't spend your psychic energy defending yourself to the world, to your mother, to your spouse, to the culture, to the neighbors. And when that energy is freed up and you don't have to defend yourself because you've accepted your horrible, rotten self and you've fallen in love with your horrible, rotten self, which of course isn't horrible and rotten, but I think you know what I mean. And if you don't, read the book that I wrote about it. When you come to terms with your own horrible, rotten self, all you want to do is love other people and give them the gift that somebody gave to you. And that's really why I do this and I give it away for free. It's not a business decision, although it supports the people that come to our program. I do this because I want to give to you all what somebody else gave to me. And I want to try to articulate it and explain it and use personal stories and myths and quotes to just communicate to you something that somebody taught me by the way that they were with me. So thank you for that question. And do what feels, as the guru would say, do what feels best to you. Somebody writes, I'm curious what your thoughts are on birth order characteristics and or dynamics within a family. Well, birth order is like a lot of things. There are certain patterns that seem to be true. When I studied birth order, I started to mention this as we were sitting waiting to press record this evening, and I saw this question come in. This was the thing that converted me to psychology and therapy, birth order. It was my first course in college, in my first semester on child development. I had a strong resistance prior to this to becoming a therapist, in part because of the therapist that I was forced to see when I was a teenager. I had resentment and I didn't want to become them. So I took this class on child development, and one of the sections of this course was on birth order. And as they started to describe the birth order, and you have to memorize the characteristics and proclivities of each order, I realized I don't have to study because all I have to do is look at my family. We went up to number 4. So I thought, and I have 2 brothers, an older and a younger. I thought anything that's like my older brother is birth order number 1. Anything that is like me is birth order number 2, personality construct, constellation. Anything that is like my younger brother is like number 3. And then whatever doesn't fit any of us is number 4. And they don't have a lot of birth order studies past 3 because there's just not a lot of data in that area. So I'm a fan of it. I see birth order as more predictive of human behavior than anything that's easily accessible. It's really easy to find out which birth order slot somebody fits into by asking them, right? It's really easy to figure that out. And the firstborn tends to, I'll give you some general, the firstborn tends to identify with the values of the most powerful parent. And their goal is to get an A. Their goal is to support the overt rules in the family, the kind of consciously stated rules in the family. It is to be good, right? They tend to be more uptight and anxious. They tend to be more driven and ambitious. They tend to be leaders. There's always positives, right? They tend to have a good deal of confidence in terms of their ability to go out in the world and accomplish things and do things. There's a lot of things that come with it. The second born identifies with the parent who has less power. They tend to make the implicit explicit. They tend to challenge the rules and the status quo. Now, of course, in lots of families, we see that flipped, and we call that dethroning in birth order. It can be flipped the other way. In my children's life, it is flipped in a lot of ways. But the second born tends to be the rebel, the one that drops out, the one that gets the F instead of the A. But they also can be very creative. And the spirit of the rebellion means that they will blaze new trails. They won't go like the firstborn and follow the path to find their success. They'll find their own path. And they will challenge the things that aren't being talked about in the family. And that was my job. The thirdborn tends to try to create balance between the two parties, the two parents. That was my brother. Still to this day, if you said to anybody in our family the phrase calm down, I can still hear my younger brother telling my fighting parents to calm down when he was a young child. They're kind of they're often less verbal. They're often sensitive. They look and seek balance in the family. They will often stay. They come in the wake of the second born who's made lots of noise and gotten in a lot of trouble. So they'll try to be the quiet ones. They'll try to disappear. They can be lost in that way. And then it goes on to fourth and fifths in some studies. So I like it. It's interesting and curious. But as is the case in all psychological models, it's a framework that we use as a hypothesis and we try it out. And if it's helpful in understanding somebody, we use it. So I find it to be a wonderful kind of way of coding people and seeing if it fits. And there are enough cases where it doesn't fit at all that it's not the umbrella under which all of my psychological theory rests, right? But it is fun and interesting, and it absolutely applies to me and to a lot of my clients. And when it does, I kind of share with them, and it gives them a sense that they're not the first one that's doing this. If they're a firstborn, you're not the first one. If you're a secondborn, you're not the first one. You're not alone in this. And that feeling that we're not alone, that somebody else has gone through this first, that can give us peace. That can give us a sense of connectedness, even if it's just to this birth order model. So thank you. It's a fun one. Somebody writes in and says, my daughter spent 3 months out of Voc in the wilderness. She's now 3 months into a residential treatment center, just turned 17. I'm struggling with boundaries. I stepped over one at our Christmas visit, insisting she send thank you notes to her Christmas gift givers. I agreed to back down from that request, but I did not want to because I feel it is important to be grateful. I need to figure out what's up with me because this was a tough issue. Harder ones are coming. Thank you for the confession. And I mean that in all sincerity. I think therapy and sometimes this format, these questions can be a confessional, a sacred confessional, right? Where we just admit who we are. I remember, I haven't told this story in some time. I remember that I had a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, came over to visit around the holidays. And she was Jewish, and she brought over chocolate. She brought over dreidel. She brought over a whole bunch of stuff to tea. I think she cooked something for the kids. This is years ago. to teach them about Jewish tradition. My kids loved it because there were treats and games involved, and they just loved it. And I remember watching her sit on the ground with my little young children and play with them. And I remember thinking, I'm not that good at play. I can do projects with the kids. I'll take them to Home Depot with me and we'll pick out things. I'll include them in shop, things like that, if we're doing things. And I realized, I know this about myself, that my childhood didn't have a lot of spontaneity in play. There was too much trauma, too much uncertainty. And being a child was something that came at a great cost because we didn't have a father, and if I was a child, it would be too difficult and too painful. So I grew up quick so as to avoid the trauma of not having someone there to take care of me. So I was watching her and I was watching her play, and I was feeling sad and I was feeling jealous and envious. And I came to my therapy session that week and I confessed this. I said, my friend Jen was over, and I described to my therapist about how she was playing with the children and they were loving it, and how I can't do that. It's so uncomfortable for me. And my therapist had the audacity to observe and remark and to say, yeah, you're not very good at that. And I was almost like, how dare you agree with me? How dare you validate my description of myself when it's not so favorable? I thought she was going to give me a reframe and say, no, you are good, or you're giving it. But she just said, yeah, you're not very good at that. And I was like, oh, wow, that's hard to hear. I don't know what I said, or if she could just sense my pain and disappointment at the mirror, if you will. And it was non-judgmental. And she said, but you're good at other things. I had older children at the time. She said, you're with your teenage children. You're great under when there's stress, when there's pressure, when there's anxiety, when there's depression, when there's a crisis. You're fantastic. You're great at helping parents work with this. You're great at supporting your wife and helping her process. You're an incredible listener to her, and she started to listen to things that I'm good at in the context of the family. And but more important than what I was good at, I had to first accept that I wasn't good at the thing, and then I had to wonder, like you are. I wonder what that tells me about my past. I wonder what that tells me about me. And that's really what this kind of therapy is. It's not about the techniques and the tools that will fix everything and make it better. That's the old game. The new game is look in a mirror, compassionately, non-judgmentally. Come to terms with who you are. Take responsibility for your life and its happiness or lack thereof, its meaning or the lack thereof. Come to terms with the wounds and the dents that you carry and deal with them. And on this path of healing and recovery, there's plenty more to come, like you say. More and more and more will come up for you. The more I've worked on in therapy, the more I've worked on myself, the more I can see my pathology. But I can see it because of the work. And it doesn't come with shame. And because it doesn't come with shame, I can see it. And because it doesn't come with shame, I can I can gently, lovingly regard myself, give myself grace. And then the most amazing thing happens. I get just a little bit better at that thing, but not because I'm trying to get better at that thing. I get better at it because I love myself. Remember, this is a quote from somebody else. I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to love you, and love will be your teacher. I love that quote. So I love your confession. I love what you're talking about. It's a human question. And the question of what's up with me, I love how you frame that. That's the right question. I'm not concerned with the fact, I'll end with this. This is really important also. Mom and dad, those listening. The mistake isn't the thing that hurts them. The fact that you yelled, the fact that you lost your temper, every parent does that. The fact that in my case you couldn't play with the younger children so spontaneously, or in your case that you broke the boundary about imposing your views about gratitude onto your child and asking them to take care of you in the way that you were taught the right way to be in life was. That's not the problem. That's just life. That's just human. The problem is the defense. The problem is that when that thing happens, when you yell, When you impose this morality onto your child that was handed down to you, this idea, when you reinforce it and use your leverage as the big person, as the parent, or guilt or shame to impose that onto your child, that's not the great wound. That's what happens to everybody. The greatest wound is when the child tells you about it and is upset with you and shares it with you, you defend it. Just like the previous parent, the previous person that asked about visiting her aging mother. The wounds happen, more or less. That is not what fundamentally wounds our children. It's the defense of the parent. The parents need to be good to not be wrong. And that's why the outcome of this work, my daughter wrote this quote, the outcome of this work, of this healing parent work, is that the parent is willing to allow the child to cast them, the parent, as the villain in the child's story. And not so the child can be helpless and blame the world for their unhappiness, but so the child can feel their feelings. That the child can be themselves, be angry when they're angry and sad when they're sad, and happy when they're happy. So, very human question. I love even the slight sense of humor that you included in the question. I love that. That's great energy, really positive energy. It tells me that you're making friends with your horrible, rotten self. And yeah, you can talk to your child about gratitude and what your thoughts are about it. But remember, it's not their job to incorporate your values into their life. They don't owe that to you. I don't value the same things my mother does. Thank heavens. I don't vote for the same politicians. I don't go to the same church on Sunday. I don't believe what she believes. And I'm grateful, and so are my children and my family for it. It makes me and them happier, more peaceful people, much more generous and loving. So it's not their job to take what you think and to live accordingly. It's their job to figure themselves out. And if everything goes well, they're going to grow beyond you. They're going to have some version of this with you later on in life where they can say to you, I don't believe what you believe. I don't see the world the way that you see it. And if we've done our work, our response will be, hallelujah. Wonderful. You've become something other. And I can love you as other. And what a wonderful gift that that our otherness doesn't prevent our connection. All right, last question for this evening. Somebody says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on younger siblings and helping them cope. My 15-year-old son was in a partial hospitalization program, then hit by a car and is subsequently self-medicating with marijuana, amongst other things. He also went to live with his father 4 months ago, where there are no rules and no boundaries, and almost complete parental alienation. Dad isn't listening to therapists, psychiatrists, school social workers, and insists our son is doing great. Our daughter is trapped in the middle and trying to support her brother and father. She is still going back and forth between households. Since the estrangement, I have participated in an intensive, have been attending Al-Anon and CODA meetings and therapy. My daughter is interested in therapy, but dad is against most forms of therapy, so will likely insist she doesn't need therapy. I'd appreciate any thoughts on how to speak with our daughter and support her watching the unhealthy behavior of her brother and father. What a tough one. I always say that when you have a co-parent who's not shouldering their load of the emotional work, healing, you are fighting a fight with one hand tied behind your back, period. You can win the fight, but it is going to be hard. So more important than what you say or teach your daughter, it's just the way that you are becoming, right? It's the way you are becoming. The outcome of our work in therapy is not what we get, but who we become. That's really important. So what you are becoming will be the strength, the psychological resource that she will feed off of. And you have a little bit of a conflict of interest. You have a dog in this fight, in the sense that there have been there's this hurt and estrangement that have happened between the two of you, you and your co-parent. That's why the divorce, of course. And so some of that hurt that you carry can fuel the way that you respond to your daughter. In other words, it can have a little bit of an extra charge in it. You're not the best, most objective person to help her. That's my point. So more listening. You're going to slip up. We all do. But say as little as you can about Father and his perspective. Be there for her. Be the person that you are becoming all the time, and you'll be that resource for her. I'm not sure I understand why she can't go to therapy, even if the father doesn't like it. I don't know if that's something that the divorce agreement would prohibit or not. If it is, that's unfortunate. That's too bad. But there's time. There's time. The therapy I did as a teenager, I think it gave me exposure to some things. I think there was wonderful parts of it. Sometimes I wanted to go, and there are still things, discussions, specifically sessions that I had as a teenager that I still draw upon to this day. There's a book that I read, my therapist gave me called Illusions, written by Richard Bach, who is the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. That's where you might know the name. And I love the book Illusions to this day. I just recommended it to somebody this week, a family member this week who was asking about something. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate your situation. Just keep on your side of the street. And in the long run, some of the best work will happen after their teenage years, and there are going to be dents and bruises that you make, that dad makes, and becoming, I'm not saying you are, but the danger or risk in these situations is to become obsessed with how wrong the other parent is. Sometimes an out of the box option like no boundaries can sometimes give space for the child to develop in certain ways too. And I can't really comment on the opinion, but just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing all the right things. It's making a difference. And your children will thank you when you're the one that they're visiting when you're older. They will visit you not because they should, not because their church tells them to. They'll visit because they want to see you. And even at that advanced age, you'll still be their mother, and they'll still be your children. And what I mean by that is you're still going to be the bigger person, psychologically speaking. You're still going to be the one that how they hold you in their mind is different than how you hold them. Right? We never love our parents as much as we love our children. And to try to change that fact for a lot of people can be very, very difficult, painful, and harmful. My mother was the one who told me that. And that was one gift that she did give me. It was wonderful. She said she learned a long time ago, you'll never love your parents as much as you love your children. That's true for me. Maybe that's not true for some people. But the fact of the matter, the fact that it's true for me and that it's true for some people is important to say it as an option, that's a way of thinking. And I felt free immediately. Like, oh, I can never match the anxious love that she expresses. I can never match it. And I don't even have to try anymore. And I can be aware of the fact that my children will never love me as much as I will love them. And that's okay. And they're off the hook of taking care of my ego, of reflecting back to me, right? They don't get used then in the process of supporting my ego. I don't eat them, if you will, psychologically speaking. I don't consume them. The energy doesn't flow from them to me. It flows from me to them, and that flow, that love is the gift of parenting, of course. It's the great sacrifice, the great compromise, and the great gift of parenting is the love that we feel towards our children. So thank you for all of that. All right, folks, I will save all the slides and quotes that I had posted for another night. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, are available on Amazon and Audible. You can check them out here. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, these are filling up more and more in advance. In fact, I think the February one might be on the verge of full. Maybe there's a spot left. February 21st through 25th is our next available in-person intensive, and it's an all-encompassing, all-inclusive therapeutic intensive for 4.5 days. It goes over 5 days. It is the best springboard into your work if you're new, or the best accelerator. Even if you've been to therapy, I promise you, the impact of an intensive, even if you're an experienced person in therapy, is profound. I hear it consistently. almost all the time do I hear it. And it was my experience too. We also have an online version. I guess that one starts tomorrow. There may or may not be a spot, January 26th through 28th. We have them online also every other month, half the time, a third of the cost. So if time and money are a precious resource right now that you have to reserve, you have to be careful with, the online option is a great offering. March 8th is the next one after that. We have Returning to the sequel, March 6th. There's also a group, this is great, a group of people who did an intensive who are coming back as a group, possibly. We've had that happen a couple of times. They come back as a group because they've stayed in contact. So Returning to You is the sequel to Finding You. It's just more of the same. I'll be running Returning to You. And then the Finding Connection workshop, that may have been filled. Check with our intensive admissions folks at Intensive Out of Oak Therapy. If you want to do your work at an intensive with your partner, the couples, the Finding Connection workshop is a fantastic opportunity to do it. And we'll be running these once or twice a year. I'll be running those. We have custom offerings for families and couples and co-parents. So check out our website or email intensivesatofoaktherapy.com. We have support groups for current and alumni families. The next offering is, I think there might be one tonight. There might be one tonight. If you can check the website, Libby, and tell me, that'd be great. The next one after tonight, I'll announce that when Libby tells us, is February 1st at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. February 1st, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. We have one meeting a month that's just for alumni. So people that are a little bit farther along on the journey. February 19th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then if you are an intensives or a coaching client or alumni, February 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is your support group. You can contact supportgroups@evoketherapy.com or go to our website for more information. All right. We have coaches that work with you. So if you need a coach for codependency, for transitions, for stage of life, for marriage, for co-parenting, for whatever's going on for you, for psychedelic integration, if you've done psychedelic ceremonies and you want to do the work of integration afterwards, our virtual coaches are wonderful. They've all been exposed and trained in the attachment model. And so if you like what you're hearing here, you can contact our team by emailing coaching@evoketherapy.com and get your own coach. Wonderful people, about 40 different coaches with a variety of backgrounds that we can match you up with. We ask all current parents to try at least 6 of the following 12-step support groups: alanon.org, coda.org. There is one tonight, by the way. If you want to hop off and get onto that meeting, there is a meeting tonight. Just hop off and go over to that meeting. Alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. Also, refugerecovery.org is a recovery group that is for people that might struggle with a higher power. It's Buddhist inspired, if that appeals to you. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place, a great local resource to find classes and resources in your local communities. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. So wherever you consume podcasts, just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast and subscribe to us there. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there by the same search. And on Evoke's YouTube channel, you can find us and there, subscribe there, and you can watch all the video rebroadcasts. If you want to watch the slides or you want to watch the video of me, you can do that. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks, I'm going to be talking to you next week. This is good stuff. I'm going to be talking about the shadow, some of my favorite work, talking about what the shadow is, what the unconscious is, what the ego is, what the parts of the self are, and how shadow work, looking and going into the darkness, is finding access to our creativity, to our energy, to our bliss, to our love, to all the things that we were told to be afraid of, going into that place. And what you find is nothing but love. So I'll be talking about shadow work. January 30th at 6 p.m. will be that next broadcast. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. Thank you for your questions. I loved reading them and responding to them. And on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thank you for showing up to something like this. And thank you for doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.